There are moments in life when a single whisper changes everything. Imagine a man who has it all: wealth, power, recognition, yet walks alone with nothing but the weight of his grief. And then, in the stillness of a park, a fragile voice rises from the shadows. "It hurts, sir. Please help me." That one plea stopped him in his tracks, and in that instant, his world shifted forever. This is not just a story about rescuing a child. It is about the way broken hearts can mend each other, how love can grow where loss once lived, and how hope can be found in the smallest, most fragile voices. Stay with us, because what happens next will stir something deep inside you. And if this story touches your heart, subscribe now to Loss and Healing, where every story reminds us that even in the darkest places, light can be found. He should have been standing beneath golden lights, the kind that shimmered across polished wood and crystal chandeliers, with the polite applause of Charleston's elite filling the air. Landon Reed's name was etched on the placard that waited for him. Another award, another testament to his brilliance as an architect, a visionary, a builder of futures. Yet instead of basking in praise, he found himself at the quiet gates of Birchwood Park, the scent of freshly cut grass and dogwood blossoms drifting on the breeze. His collar was pulled high against the warmth of a spring night that still felt cold to him, not because of the weather, but because of the empty weight that pressed into his chest. His hand gripped his phone tighter than necessary, the screen holding a photograph he rarely allowed himself to see anymore. Emily, her hand resting gently on her belly, smiling with a tired glow that could still light up his entire memory. The house in the background was no longer theirs, sold after silence had hollowed it out. The picture remained the same, but he had changed. His face had hardened, time and grief chiseling it until even the man in the photo would hardly have recognized him. The world still called him relentless, brilliant, unstoppable. Yet beneath those titles, he was simply a man wearing a wedding ring for a life that had slipped away. He let the phone fall into his pocket and sighed. The sounds of the gala echoed in his memory, laughter and rehearsed introductions that felt empty now. He no longer belonged in those rooms of silk ties and hollow praise. Here, in the winding paths beneath the willow trees, he could simply walk. Walking had become his only medicine, step after step dulling the ache inside. Yet tonight, the ache would not fade. He wandered deeper into the park, past petals falling like confetti over stone paths, past joggers who paid him no attention. It was here, in this quiet, that he noticed what first looked like discarded clothing on a bench by the duck pond. As he drew closer, the truth revealed itself. It was not fabric. It was a child, a little girl, small and fragile, curled at the edge of the bench. Her dress was torn at the hem, her bare feet red and raw from the cold. She sat still, unnaturally still, like a statue carved out of sorrow. No tears, no movement, just silence heavy enough to pierce through the night. Landon froze, the jolt in his spine unlike anything he had felt in years. She lifted her head slowly, and their eyes met. In that one look, he saw it all: pain, fear, and something even more devastating: resignation. Her lips parted, and her voice was so soft it nearly disappeared into the wind. "It hurts, sir. Please help me." The words shattered him. His knees buckled before his mind could catch up, and he dropped beside her without thinking. His chest tightened as though grief itself had risen from where he had buried it. Her face was pale, too pale, smudged with dirt and traces of something darker. His voice broke when he spoke. "Sweetheart?" A word he had not spoken aloud in years. He reached out with open hands. "Where is your mom or dad? Did someone leave you here?" She flinched, not from him, but from the question itself, like the words were knives. Slowly, she shook her head. "No one is coming." The silence that followed was unbearable. He gently held out his hand. "Can I look at where it hurts?"
After a hesitation that felt like eternity, she pulled back her sleeve with trembling fingers. The bruise across her arm was deep and jagged, a sickening purple surrounded by fading shades of older pain.
It told a story without words. His breath caught, and for a moment he could not speak. This was not just a child left behind. This was a child who had been hurt, who had been silenced, who had been forgotten. He forced himself to breathe, to speak softly. "What is your name?" Her gaze fell to her small hands. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Allen." He nodded slowly, fighting the lump in his throat. "Okay, Sophie. I am Landon. I'm going to help you now. You are safe. She did not argue. She did not nod either. But when he gathered her gently into his arms, she did not resist. She was far too light, her body fragile as if made of paper, her breaths shallow and uncertain. She rested her head on his shoulder, not in trust, but as if she no longer knew how to resist gravity. He stood there holding her while the world around them carried on, joggers passing, the pond rippling, the city beyond glowing as if nothing had changed. But for him, everything had. This was no coincidence. This was not random. This moment mattered more than anything had in a very long time. He pulled his coat tighter around her tiny frame and walked back toward the road. Beneath the dogwoods, her small hand clutched weakly at his collar, and though she said nothing more, the message was clear. She needed him. His eyes burned, the sound of distant applause from the gala fading into irrelevance. He did not know where the road ahead would lead, but he knew one truth with unshakable clarity. He was not letting go. Not now. Not ever. The city lights stretched across the windshield in blurred ribbons as Landon guided his black SUV through the quiet Charleston streets.
Come on, let's go.
In the back seat, Sophie curled into herself like a stray kitten, too small inside a jacket that belonged to a man twice her size. She had not spoken since he buckled her in. Bare feet tucked beneath her, hands pressed together in her lap, she sat silent as though silence was the only language she trusted. Every so often, her gaze shifted toward the trees flying past the windows, but her eyes never seemed to settle on the present. She was somewhere else, a place far heavier than the leather seats and warm air around her. Landon adjusted the rearview mirror, not to check traffic, but to keep her in sight. The thought of her sitting there, bruised and barefoot, broke something inside him he thought had been calcified long ago. He lowered the heat gently, sending warmth toward the back seat without a word. She blinked, slow and uncertain, but did not move. His phone buzzed in the cup holder, the name of his assistant lighting up the screen. He knew the questions waiting for him: why he had left the gala, what to tell the investors, how to salvage the Paris deal. Instead of explanations, he answered with silence, finally pressing the call only to say, "I am not coming back tonight." And then he ended it, tossing the phone aside like it was a weight he no longer intended to carry. In the mirror, he caught the faintest movement.
You belong here.
Sophie had tilted her head toward the window, her lips parting just enough to let words escape. Her voice was hoarse, shaped by years of being unheard. "You do not have to keep me." The sentence hung in the air like frost. Landon frowned, his grip on the wheel tightening. "What do you mean?" She looked down at her bare feet, her tone flat with memorized truth. "He said I was too much, too loud, too expensive. If I could just be good for once, maybe they would keep me." Each word was sharp enough to cut, not because of the sound, but because of the absence of tears. She said it like a fact, like her own existence was an inconvenience she had been told to apologize for. The ache in Landon's chest deepened into something near fury, but he swallowed it down. He did not want her to see rage, even if it was not directed at her. When they turned onto the road leading toward his estate, the gates opened slowly, scanning the license plate before swinging wide. His house rose from manicured lawns and hedges, trimmed to perfection, a monument to success that now felt hollow. Sophie's voice came again, softer this time. "This does not look like a place for kids." Landon's throat tightened. "It did not used to be, but that can change." He parked at the entrance, killed the engine, and stepped out into the glow of golden lights.
I will not let go.
When he opened the back
Not now.
door, she stayed
ever.
still, watching the towering house with the tension of someone expecting rejection. Landon knelt beside her, his voice low. "You do not have to go in if you are not ready, but it is warm inside, and safe." She studied him for what felt like forever. Then, with a small nod, she allowed him to lift her once more. This time, her head rested against his chest, not with trust, but with weary surrender, as if gravity had chosen her place for her. Inside, the marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers, their brightness emphasizing the emptiness of the space. Landon felt like a guest in his own home, the silence stretching across wide halls where laughter had once belonged. He carried her into a smaller room at the back, a den that had become his refuge from the cold perfection of the rest of the house. A leather couch, a fireplace, and shelves of novels collecting dust were all that filled it. He placed her gently on the couch, fetched a blanket, and draped it over her. As he turned to leave, her whisper stopped him. "If I am quiet and do not eat much, can I stay for a little while?" The question pierced him deeper than any accusation. She was not asking for love, not even for permanence. She was begging for tolerance, a chance to take up the smallest amount of space possible. Landon sat back down, leaning forward until he could meet her eyes. His voice was steady, though his heart was not. "You do not have to earn this. You do not have to make yourself smaller to stay. You belong here, Sophie." Her hands gripped the blanket tighter, and though she did not answer, her eyes blinked faster, as if holding back something she did not yet dare to release. The fire hissed softly in the hearth, the warmth circling the room like an embrace neither of them had expected. Landon placed a hand gently over hers. "I do not know what you have been told," he said quietly, "but you deserve more than what you have been given." For the first time since they met, she allowed her hand to loosen beneath his. Not much, just enough for his palm to rest against hers without resistance. That tiny shift, that unspoken permission, told him this was no fleeting encounter, this was not charity. It was the beginning of something that would demand everything he had left to give. As the night stretched on, Landon remained nearby, watching over her as she drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. She clung to his jacket like it was armor. He thought of Emily, of the life he had lost, of the silence he had carried like chains. And then he thought of this fragile girl who had whispered her pain into the night, and how that whisper had rewritten his entire story. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man cursed by loss. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a chance he had never expected to be given. A chance to choose love again, not through grand gestures or crowded ballrooms, but in the quiet act of keeping one small child safe. And as dawn began to stir faint light across the windows of the den, Landon knew with certainty that, whatever the cost, he was not going to let her go. Not now, not ever. The morning light spilled through tall windows, but it did little to brighten the heaviness in Landon's chest. Sophie had slept curled into the corner of the leather couch, her small body still clutching the jacket he had draped around her. Her breathing was steady, yet it carried the cautious rhythm of someone who had learned never to sleep too deeply. Landon had not closed his eyes much at all. Instead, he sat in the armchair across from her, listening to the faint crackle of the fireplace, watching over her as though his vigilance alone could keep her safe. By the time she stirred awake, the sun had already painted the room in warm streaks. He greeted her softly and offered oatmeal sprinkled with cinnamon, recalling how Emily had once insisted cinnamon made mornings feel less ordinary. Sophie hesitated, then accepted the spoon with delicate caution, as though kindness might be taken back at any moment. When she whispered the word cinnamon with faint surprise, Landon felt something inside him shift. It was not a smile, not yet, but the first hint of trust flickered between them. Later, she asked about returning to her room. At first, he did not understand, but then she clarified in a whisper, "Room 9B." The words themselves made his stomach twist. He could not imagine what waited there, but he knew he had to see it through her eyes. He packed a small bag with clothes and a blanket from the donation closet his company used for charity drives. When she slid into the passenger seat beside him, clutching her stuffed bear as though it were a shield, he realized just how small her world had been, how fragile. The farther they drove from his neighborhood, the more the city seemed to sag into disrepair. Potholes scarred the streets. Faded billboards loomed like forgotten promises. Gas stations sat with windows covered in dust. When they pulled into the Marigold Budget Inn, the building looked tired, its yellow paint peeling, neon sign buzzing faintly like it had given up trying to glow. Sophie pointed toward the corner with a finger that barely trembled. "There, 9B." Her hand remained in his as they walked across the cracked pavement. She produced a spare key from inside her shoe, a detail that hit him harder than he expected. This child had been forced to learn survival habits no 7-year-old should ever know. When the door creaked open, the smell of mildew and stale smoke struck first, followed by the dim buzz of a failing fluorescent bulb. Landon's jaw clenched as he took in the stained carpet, the broken furniture, the heap of clothes shoved into a torn trash bag. This was not a home. It was a holding place for despair. Sophie stepped inside with the familiarity of someone returning to a prison cell. She moved to a drawer and retrieved 2 objects, a wrinkled report card and a folded piece of paper scrawled with purple crayon. She handed them to him without a word. Her grades were exceptional, every subject marked with quiet brilliance. The teacher's note described her as hardworking, full of potential. Landon's throat tightened as he unfolded the drawing. A stick figure child, a heart, and the plea written in block letters, "Please do not forget me." He looked at her then, really looked, and knew he could never erase what she had lived, but he could make sure she was not forgotten again. Kneeling down to her level, he asked gently, "What do you need to take?" She whispered only one thing. Mr. Buttons, the stuffed bear hidden beneath the thin mattress. She pulled it out, hugged it tight, and nodded. That was all. That was everything. As they turned to leave, a woman from a nearby room stepped out, lighting a cigarette, her voice rough from years of smoke and weariness. She asked if he was looking for the girl's mother. Landon's heart pounded as he listened. Catherine Allen had been taken by ambulance 2 nights ago, collapsed and left behind while her boyfriend disappeared. There had been shouting, bruises, the kind of chaos neighbors heard but never intervened in. Landon thanked her quietly and walked Sophie back to the car in silence. Inside, he pulled out his phone and sent a message to his attorney, demanding hospital records and an investigation into the man named Travis. The reply came quickly. She would handle it immediately. Landon slipped the phone away and turned to Sophie. She hugged the bear so tightly it seemed like she was holding her entire life together in that one embrace. Then her voice returned, so faint he almost missed it. "Do you think she left me on purpose?" The question hollowed him out. He turned to her, his voice firm but soft. "No, she did not." Sophie's eyes filled with doubt, her voice shaking as she said, "He told me she gave up." Landon shook his head. "He was wrong. Your mother did not give up on you. She could not tell you, but she was fighting to protect you. I promise you, Sophie, I am going to find the truth." She did not respond, but she did not resist when he buckled her seatbelt once more. As they pulled away, the motel shrinking in the rearview mirror, Landon made a silent vow. No child should ever question if they were wanted, if they belonged. Not on his watch. That evening, back in the echoing halls of his home, Sophie walked through the foyer clutching her bear, her new clothes too large but soft against her skin. She moved with careful steps, still waiting to see if this world would accept her. Landon led her upstairs to a guest room that had stood unused for years. The bed was neatly made, the shelves lined with books never opened. A small lamp shaped like a crescent moon casting gentle light. She paused at the doorway, whispering if she could place Mr. Buttons on the pillow. When he said yes, she did so with reverence, as though staking her claim on a piece of the world at last. Later, she sat cross-legged on the bed, eating pancakes he had burned slightly at the edges. She murmured that she liked them crispy, and Landon smiled, realizing that even imperfection could be comfort. When she finally fell asleep that night, he stood at the doorway watching her. The moonlight traced her face, still marked by bruises, but softened by peace he hoped would grow. For the first time in years, the silence in his house did not feel like loss. It felt like the beginning of something worth holding on to. The days that followed did not rush forward with dramatic turns, but unfolded with the quiet rhythm of ordinary life. Something Landon had nearly forgotten how to cherish. Each morning began with the smell of pancakes on the stove. Cinnamon stirred into the batter just as Emily once did, though now it was for a child who sat at the table with cautious gratitude in her eyes. Sophie ate slowly, as if each bite was an experiment in trust, but she finished every plate. That small act filled him with a pride he had not felt in years. One afternoon, while the garden basked in the glow of noon, Sophie slipped her hand into his as they walked the stone path. The movement was so natural that Landon almost forgot to breathe. 5 small fingers curled into his palm. No explanation offered, no permission sought. It was a declaration without words. She was no longer walking alone. Her wide-brimmed hat, found in one of Emily's old donation boxes, slid awkwardly to one side as she crouched beside the flower bed with a plastic spade. Together, they planted sunflowers, cherry tomatoes, and a stubborn lavender bush that refused to stay upright. Sophie named the worms they found Mildred, Pickle, and Sir Wiggleslaughing at her own imagination. Landon laughed with her, not the polite laugh he gave at galas, but a real one, startling and liberating. In the afternoons, when Sophie napped on the sofa, Landon often returned to his study only to find small surprises left behind. Once, it was a pressed daisy resting on his desk, delicate and fragile, the first gift she had ever given him. He placed it carefully beneath glass, unwilling to let it wither unnoticed. Another time, it was a crayon drawing, a house, a tall figure, a small girl, and the words scrawled in uneven letters. "This feels safe." He framed it and set it on his bookshelf, not as decoration but as proof that healing was possible. Not every moment was light. One night, well past midnight, Landon was awakened by the faint sound of water running. He followed it to the guest room and found Sophie crouched on the floor, frantically scrubbing at the sheets with paper towels. Her shoulders shook as she whispered apologies, convinced she had ruined everything by an accident she could not control. When she saw him, her face went pale, braced for anger that never came. "I did not mean to," she said, trembling. "I tried to get up. I did not want to mess it up." Landon knelt beside her, his voice steady. "Sophie, it is okay. You are not disgusting. You are not what he said you were." He helped her clean the sheets without scolding, hand-washing them himself in the quiet of the laundry room so she would not hear the machine. By morning, the kitchen smelled of pancakes again, this time with vanilla stirred into the batter, the way Emily used to like them. Sophie ate in silence, then whispered, "You did not get mad." Landon shook his head. "No, not even a little." Trust grew not in leaps, but in tiny increments, like seedlings pushing through soil. Sophie began humming while she played, her soft voice carrying fragments of songs she invented. She painted a rock to look like a ladybug and left it on the kitchen counter as though it belonged there. She tried on one of his old ties and declared herself the CEO of sandwiches, her grin so wide that Landon could not help but laugh until his ribs hurt. He found himself checking his phone less, leaving his laptop closed, letting calls go unanswered. Work that once consumed him now felt like background noise compared to the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing through the garden. One evening, they visited the hospital. Catherine Allen lay unconscious, her body frail but her vitals stable. Landon had arranged for a private suite, pulling every string he could to ensure Sophie's mother received the care she deserved. Sophie sat beside the bed, holding her mother's hand and humming softly as though her voice could bridge the gap between worlds. She did not cry, she did not plead. She simply stayed present and steady, believing that love alone might be enough to call her mother back. Landon watched from the windowsill, silent, his chest tight with emotions he did not dare name. "She used to sing to me," Sophie said quietly, her gaze fixed on Catherine. "Even when we had no food," she sang. "There was one about a rabbit who owned a bakery. He always burned the muffins." Landon smiled faintly through the ache in his throat. "Sounds like he and I would get along." Sophie almost smiled, then turned back to her mother. "I do not think she knows I am here." Landon spoke gently. "She does. She feels you every time you hold her hand." Sophie tightened her grip, and for a moment, Landon believed it too. That night, after returning home, Sophie left another drawing on his bed. Two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing beside the duck pond in Birchwood Park. On the bench behind them sat Mr. Buttons, her bear. The sun smiled in the corner of the page and the figures held hands. Landon stared at it for a long time, before placing it carefully in the drawer beside the photograph of Emily and the sonogram he had kept hidden all these years. The ache that once consumed him now felt different. Not just grief, but something new, something alive. The rhythm of their days became a kind of sanctuary. Morning sunlight over pancakes, afternoons in the garden with worms and seeds, evenings by the fire with drawings and quiet conversations. Healing did not arrive with fanfare. It arrived in the form of Sophie's hand, slipping into his, her laughter at the kitchen table, her quiet presence in a house that no longer felt empty. For the first time in a long time, Landon felt like he was building something worth more than stone and glass. He was building a safe place, not just for Sophie, but for himself as well. The hospital room was cloaked in the heavy stillness of machines and waiting, the soft beeping of a monitor marking time like a fragile heartbeat. Sophie sat perched on the edge of a recliner, her little legs swinging nervously while her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She hummed the same lullaby she always chose, the one about a rabbit with burnt muffins. Her voice was steady, too steady for a child her age, as though she believed if she kept singing, her mother would hear and return. Landon sat in the corner of the room, his elbows resting on his knees, his fingers locked together. He had been there for nearly an hour, silent, willing something to change. The clock ticked, and then it happened. Catherine's fingers twitched beneath the blanket. Sophie's song broke off mid-note, her eyes wide. "Mom!" she gasped. Landon was already on his feet as Catherine's eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted, dry and cracked, and her head tilted faintly toward the sound of her daughter's voice. Sophie. The word was barely more than a breath, but it was her name, spoken out loud. Sophie collapsed into her mother's embrace, sobbing against her ribs. "You're back! I knew you'd come back."
It is going to be all right.
Catherine's trembling hand found Sophie's hair, stroking it with a weakness that carried more love than strength. Landon turned away, overcome, pressing his back to the hallway wall as his chest heaved with emotions too heavy to name. When the doctor confirmed she was stable, that her cognition was clear and her recovery possible, Landon exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Catherine's eyes later met his, soft with gratitude despite the pallor of her face. "You stayed," she whispered. Landon nodded once. "I did." "Why? You didn't have to." His gaze shifted to Sophie, curled tightly against her mother. "Because she asked for help," he said simply. There was no speech, no heroism, only truth. The days that followed brought slow but steady progress. Catherine regained strength, though her voice often faltered with apologies. She admitted she had tried to leave Travis, had sought a shelter, had even filed for protection, but her health had failed before she could escape. "I never meant to leave her," she murmured, tears shining at the corners of her eyes. "I was trying to protect her." Landon's voice was steady when he replied, "You did everything you could. You're here now. That's what matters." Sophie clung to her mother's hand, whispering songs, her presence proof enough of resilience. Back at Landon's home, the air shifted. Sophie no longer tiptoed down the stairs. She moved with a quiet certainty, opening the fridge without asking, greeting the stray cat from the neighbor's yard as if it belonged. These were small things, but they spoke of safety, of belonging. Landon noticed them all. He arranged for Catherine's transfer to a recovery facility across the river, ensuring the best care possible. At first, Catherine resisted, insisting she did not want to be a burden. But when she saw Sophie's hopeful eyes clinging to Landon's arm, she relented. It was not just about her healing anymore. It was about a child's fragile hope for stability. Behind the scenes, Landon worked quietly. With Catherine's consent, he filed for temporary guardianship, ensuring Sophie's place in his home was not dependent on circumstance. When the papers were handed to him in a plain envelope, the weight of them felt far heavier than their pages. Sophie, however, did not ask about legalities. She only wanted to know one thing. "Does this mean I can still come home here after school?" Landon smiled gently. "You never left." Spring unfurled itself across Charleston like a painting. Jasmine scented the air, sidewalks dusted with golden pollen, gardens alive with color. Sophie filled his days with chatter about worms, about books, about her dream of running an animal rescue on the moon. She lost every game of chess he taught her, but always demanded another, wagging her crayon-stained finger at him. "I'm going to beat you before my birthday." He teased her back, asking if it was a promise or a threat. She grinned, declaring it was both. Her 7th birthday arrived quicker than Landon had expected. Sophie did not ask for balloons or magicians. She wanted one thing. "I want to eat dinner with you and Mommy, just us, like a real family." Landon agreed without hesitation. That afternoon, he scrubbed the counters and polished the floors himself, dusting shelves he had not touched in years. He strung fairy lights across the backyard fence because Sophie once said they looked like stars close enough to touch. When Catherine arrived, stronger now, her steps careful but steady, she paused on the porch, inhaling deeply. "It smells like garlic and fresh air."
Look.
Landon smiled softly. That's mostly Sophie. Dinner was simple. Her favorite pasta, garlic bread, and a store-bought cake with clumsy blue icing. They ate under the fairy lights while Sophie filled the evening with stories of school, of worms in the garden, of her determination to master chess. She talked without pause, her laughter spilling into the night like music. After dessert, she presented drawings she had worked on in secret. One showed the three of them at a table, smiling beneath the shining sun. Above it, in crooked letters, she had written, "Best dinner ever." Another she handed to Landon, a picture of a house and two figures beneath stars, with red crayon words that read, "Thank you for staying." Landon held the paper, unable to speak. Sophie climbed into his arms, pressing her small face against his chest. For the first time in years, the silence around him did not echo with loss. It pulsed with belonging. Later that night, when Sophie had gone to bed and Catherine had returned to her rehabilitation center, Landon stood in his study holding her drawing. He reached for a wooden box on the shelf, lifting out a faded photograph of a sonogram, only image of the daughter he had lost. He stared at it for a long time, then placed it gently in the drawer below. In its place, he framed Sophie's drawing. Under the soft glow of a nearby lamp, it became his new definition of fatherhood. As the house settled into quiet that night, Landon realized he no longer felt like a man haunted by absence. He felt like a man entrusted with something fragile yet life-giving, a second chance he had no intention of wasting. Mornings no longer felt heavy. Where silence had once haunted the halls of Landon's estate, the sound of Sophie's small footsteps now filled the space with a rhythm of belonging. She did not tiptoe anymore. She moved with quiet certainty, the kind that came when a child finally believed she was welcome. She opened the refrigerator without asking, hummed to herself while brushing her teeth, and even greeted the neighbor's cat like it was part of the family. These little gestures, so ordinary on the surface, were proof of something extraordinary. She had begun to trust her place in the world. Catherine's recovery continued steadily. The rehabilitation center across the river provided the structure she needed, and though she had insisted she did not want to be a burden, she now admitted she felt stronger each day. Landon often drove Sophie to visit her. Watching his mother and daughter rebuild a bond that had never been broken, only tested. Catherine would hum along with Sophie's songs, her hands trembling but her eyes full of life. She no longer looked like a woman lost in pain, but like someone reclaiming the future she had nearly been denied. Landon, meanwhile, found his own life transformed. His phone buzzed less often because he let it. The contracts, the meetings, the endless pressure that once defined him no longer mattered as much. When Sophie asked him to join her in planting tomatoes or to read aloud the same storybook 3 nights in a row, he said yes without hesitation. He began to realize that the life he had built of steel and glass had never felt this solid. It was these small ritual pancakes with cinnamon, chess games at the kitchen table, bedtime stories under the glow of a crescent moon lamp that gave him the strength to move forward. Sophie thrived in this new rhythm. She returned from school each day with drawings, stories, and laughter that spilled over the dinner table. She played in the garden, chasing butterflies, naming each worm she discovered with imaginative pride. Landon watched her, each giggle echoing in his chest, loosening the grief that had once gripped him so tightly. One evening, as twilight stretched across the sky, she curled up on the couch and declared herself CEO of sandwiches. She wore one of his old ties around her neck like a badge of authority, her grin wide and fearless. Landon laughed until tears filled his eyes, the sound startling him with its purity. As Catherine grew stronger, she began volunteering at the women's shelter in Charleston, sharing her story not to dwell on pain but to give hope to others. Landon accompanied her once, sitting quietly in the background as she spoke to a young mother holding a baby. Catherine's voice was steady, gentle, filled with empathy. When she finished, she gestured to Landon. Hesitant at first, he admitted, "I was never supposed to be part of this story, but I am glad I am." The woman across from them whispered, "Maybe I can do what you did." Catherine smiled softly. "You already are." Back at home, Sophie's world continued to expand. Her 7th birthday was not marked with balloons or crowds, but with the intimacy of a family rediscovering itself. Landon cooked her favorite meal, and Catherine joined them under strings of fairy lights in the garden. Sophie chattered the entire evening, her voice carrying stories about school, games, and dreams that stretched to the stars. After dessert, she presented drawings as gifts. One showed the 3 of them at a table, smiling beneath a bright sun. Another she handed to Landon, a picture of a bench beneath a tree. 2 figures side by side with bold red crayon words, "Thank you for staying." Landon held it close, his throat tight, knowing it was more than a picture.
Yes, please.
It was a promise fulfilled. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Landon returned to his study. On the shelf sat a wooden box holding the last relic of a life he had once clung to. A faded sonogram, the only image of the daughter he and Emily had lost. For years, it had been a weight he could not release. Now gently, reverently, he placed it in a drawer below and replaced it with Sophie's drawing. The frame glowed softly under the lamplight, no longer a reminder of loss but a testament to renewal. His definition of fatherhood had shifted. It was no longer about what had been taken from him, but about what he had been entrusted to protect. Spring deepened over Charleston. Cherry blossoms fluttered across park benches. Jasmine filled the air, and the world seemed to exhale after a long silence. Sophie ran barefoot through Birchwood Park, laughing as a kite she had built with Landon soared above her. Catherine stood nearby, her voice brighter, her presence steadier, her cottage just a few blocks from Landon's home now filled with flowers Sophie had planted herself. They had created two homes, both safe, both filled with love, and Sophie moved between them with confidence. One evening, Sophie handed Landon a folded piece of paper with a crayon tucked behind her ear. "Do not open it until I say," she ordered with mock seriousness. He obeyed, smiling. Later, under the glow of fireflies caught in a mason jar, she gave permission. Landon unfolded the page to see a drawing of 3 figures on a bench beneath the sun. Above it, in purple crayon, were the words, "My safe place." He folded it carefully, promising aloud, "This is going somewhere special." And he meant it. That night, Landon sat in his study, the drawing now framed beside the pressed daisy Sophie had once given him. He looked at both, feeling something he had not in years. Not emptiness, not grief, but fullness, belonging. A sense that the second chance life had handed him was not only real, but worth every sacrifice. Sophie had once whispered for help, and in answering her, he had found his own way back. It was not a rescue, it was a rebirth for both of them. There are stories that slip past the noise of the world and land directly in the heart. Stories that remind us why we are here and what truly matters. This was one of those stories. A man, celebrated for his brilliance, found himself stripped of joy, carrying only the weight of memories and a silence too heavy to bear. A little girl, broken by pain she should never have known, whispered the simplest of pleas, "Please help me." And from that fragile request, 2 lives changed forever. It was never about wealth or recognition. It was never about what had been lost. It was about what could still be found. In the tremor of a child's voice, in the trembling grip of a small hand, in the quiet resilience of survival, there lies the power to rebuild. Landon thought he was offering shelter, food, and safety. But in truth, Sophie gave him something far greater, the chance to live again. Her laughter in the garden, her drawings tucked onto his desk, her whispered gratitude for staying these became the bricks of a new foundation. Not a house of stone, but a home built from trust, from gentleness, from love. Catherine's awakening was not only a mother's return to her child, but a reminder that no one is beyond healing. Broken lives can be pieced back together, not through grand gestures, but through persistence, kindness, and the belief that even when hope flickers, it is never truly gone. Together, they created not just 2 homes, but a sanctuary where belonging was no longer questioned. Sophie no longer asked if she was too much. She no longer whispered to earn her place. She knew she was wanted. She knew she was loved. And for Landon, every moment with her was proof that redemption can arrive quietly, disguised as responsibility, blossoming into joy. He discovered that second chances are not given to erase the past, but to honor it, to weave pain into something strong enough to hold the future. What began with a whisper in the dark became a symphony of healing, a story of rebirth, and a testimony that love is the most transformative force we have. If this journey touched you, let it be more than just a story. Let it be a reminder that each of us carries the power to answer the whispers around us with kindness, with courage, with presence. And if your heart stirred while listening, I invite you to join us on Loss and Healing. Subscribe to our channel, not just for more stories, but for a community where hope is rebuilt and love is celebrated. Because in a world full of noise, we need more safe places. And together we can create them.